Chapter 9. Departure Day. I felt sure that if I just waited long enough, Mud would have to leave our apartment at some point before the Prosperity set sail on Monday. I tried to put on a bored, careless attitude, while inside my pulse ticked like the gears of a clock. But Mud didn't leave. He sat in his chair in front of the door continuously. He'd pulled our little table in front of him, and for hours the slap of cards was the only thing I heard as he played solitaire. Twice each day there was a knock on the door, and Mud went into the hallway and came back with food. Was Catfish bringing it? Or someone else? There was no way to know. Mud gave me water and half of what he had to eat, but I could barely touch the food. I felt sick. With each passing hour, I became less and less sure that I'd find a way to get out of that room and make it onto the Prosperity in time. Mud broke up the hours by telling me I could have this or that special treat if I told him what the key unlocked. He made scores of empty promises. We'd leave the fens. We'd find a place in the country. He'd get a real job, maybe buy a small farm. Things would be different. I'd heard it all before. I kept my mouth shut. But the long hours of waiting frayed my nerves. I had strange waking dreams. Staring at Mud in his chair, I suddenly saw myself sitting there instead. It was me flipping the cards over and coughing hoarsely. Then I would disappear and it would be Mud again. I nearly gave in to him several times, but always stopped short. I still held out hope for some chance to escape. Darkness fell on Sunday evening, and that chance still hadn't come. I could tell Mud's leg was bothering him more than usual. He rubbed it constantly. Whoever was bringing him provisions dropped off a dinner of fried eggs and rice. This time they also left a tall brown bottle. "Here you go, Si," said Mud, sliding me the paper box of food. The smell of the fatty eggs made my stomach growl. He set the bottle down in the corner of the room farthest from his chair. His eyes flicked back and forth from me to the corner. It was hot in our apartment, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "I'm sick of sitting here, aren't you?" he said. "Just gotta tell me one little secret. We can both get out." I gobbled up the omelet and shook my head. "Fine," he spat. He stood up, sat back down, then stood up again with a groan. He limped to the corner and grabbed the bottle, twisted off the cap, and then took a swig. He nursed it all through the night, sipping it between card games. He started to tilt and sway in his chair. With a soaring feeling, I began to hope my chance had really come this time. With no windows and no clock, it was impossible to tell what time it was exactly, but from the noises outside, I knew it must be the middle of the night on Sunday. I curled up on my pallet and pretended to sleep. I must have dozed off without meaning to. When I opened my eyes, everything was quiet. The candle flickered low. Mud lay sprawled on the floor between the table and the door. Oh, for tripe's sake. Even in his drunken state, he'd had the foresight to block my way. He snored steadily. I rose and tiptoed over to him. I touched his shoulder. He didn't move. It was now or never. I scooped my hands under his armpits and dragged him backward. Mud was as heavy as a crate of melons, and I nearly fainted with the effort. I managed to get him far enough from the door to edge it open. I sucked in my breath and squeezed out into the hallway. I tiptoed down the hall and to the stairwell, then bounded down the steps 2 at a time. At the bottom, I flung open the door to the outside and blinked against the morning light. And then, behind me, I heard a roar. Mud was awake. I sprinted up the alley, knocking into 2 old women as I rounded the corner. I heard them sputter and curse at me, but I didn't turn. I fled past the rooster room, weaving my way around the sour-smelling customers staggering home. Behind me, Mud's hoarse voice rang out, "Si! Get back here!" I swerved onto one of Down Island's many narrow streets. Behind a butcher's shop, I flew over the rail of a pig pen, stepping right on the backs of the sleeping hogs, and kept running. Mud's voice followed me down an alley. He knew these escape routes. He taught them to me himself. But I knew places where he couldn't follow. I could hear the morning bells ringing from the temples at the edge of town. I had maybe 30 minutes to get to the harbor, and I still had something to do. I darted through the alleys, my feet slipping beneath me. I finally found what I was looking for, a wide alley blocked off at the end by a high wooden wall. Halfway down the alley, I heard Mud call out behind me, "Gotcha!" He took his time to catch his breath as he limped toward me. "You don't got the strength to scale that wall," he puffed. "No, I don't." I ran straight for the wall and, at the last moment, slid onto my side. My feet punched through the rotten wood boards at the base of the wall, and I wriggled through the jagged opening. I'd found this secret hole months ago, never dreaming I'd have to use it to escape my own father. Mud roared, but it was no good. He'd have to find his way around the alley, and by that time, I'd be far away. Even with my advantage, I raced down the walkways that spanned the fens, not slowing until I got to my hiding place in the mango tree. Panting, I pulled off my filthy shirt and pants and changed into my work clothes. I would be allotted some basic clothes for the expedition, but I couldn't show up at the harbor looking like a beggar, or they wouldn't even let me on the ship. I slipped my new cloak around my shoulders and grabbed the tin of money. I left the old clothes and didn't bother hiding them. I was never coming back. With the money jangling inside the tin, I took off running for the harbor. Normally, carrying a can full of money would have made me nervous, but the streets were deserted. Everyone was down at the seaside to watch the ships depart. I was grateful for empty streets as I bolted through them. But then I came up to the top of the hill that looked down onto the harbor. Throngs of people stood crammed together, shoulder to shoulder. In the bay, the ships of the expedition were lined up like plump geese ready to take flight. I stopped and tried to catch my breath. Sweat poured off of me, drenching the heavy wool cloak. I looked around. Was there a way for me to get to the water without going through the crowd? I turned, thinking I might backtrack, but then I saw Mud lumbering down the street behind me. I ran from him, straight for the crowd, shouting, "Out of the way! Out of the way, please!" No one budged. I tried to squeeze between them, but they shoved back, not willing to give up their prime views. I tried to elbow past a tall girl in an assistant apron who elbowed me right back. "Excuse me," she said. "It's very rude to—" "Wait a minute. Don't I know you?" I turned to see Tippy glowering down at me. She held a large circular basket perched on her shoulder. Her lineal bracelet gleamed at her wrist. "Oh, hello," I panted, looking over her shoulder for any sign of Mud. "Sorry about pushing you. I'm in a bit of a hurry." "Ha, good luck with that. I'm supposed to take these egg buns down to the council members." She nodded up at the basket and shifted it onto her shoulder. "But I'll be smothered by the crowd before I ever get there." I could hear Mud's voice behind me bellowing above the din. He'd knock as many people out cold as he'd have to in order to get to me. I had to get through this crowd. "Here, let me deliver your basket for you," I said to Tippy. "I can slip through the crowd more easily than you can." Tippy turned her nose up. "Thanks, but I don't want them to get dirty." Even in my desperate hurry, I paused to reflect on how much I loathed her. "Oh, well, if you're sure," I said, candy sweet. "But just be careful flashing that lineal around out in the open. There's going to be a lot of pickpockets down near the action." A horrified look crossed Tippy's face. She tried to hide her right hand in her pocket, but she couldn't hold the big basket without it. "Well, if you promise not to crush any of the buns, I suppose I could let you take them," she said snottily. I took the basket off of her shoulder with a smile. "I'll treat them like precious jewels." I balanced the basket on my head and started shoving my way through the throng. For a moment, I felt guilty for what I was about to do. The moment passed. "Hurrah for the expeditions!" I shouted. "Free egg buns by the Queen's decree! Hurrah!" I reached into the basket and grabbed a handful of the golden pastries. I tossed them in the air to my right. Instantly, the crowd turned and surged for the buns before they could fall onto the ground. I threw more. People scrambled to catch them, leaving just enough room for me to rush forward. I went on tossing the buns until they were gone, then dropped the basket. I was only a few yards from the pier now. I squeezed under and around the rows of war veterans in their faded uniforms. Near the water, the ancient council members stood on a makeshift stage, solemn as funeral goers. They could probably use an egg bun about now, the poor things. The queen herself must have been watching from some high perch, protected from having to mingle with the ordinary people below. Finally, I pushed past the crowd and emerged into the open. The breeze off the harbor blew my hair back. I tilted my face to the sky. I felt dizzy. The enormous hulk of the Prosperity loomed high over me, its towering masts grasping for the clouds. The ship's copper-plated hull had been polished so smooth that it reflected the faces of the crowd behind me. Overhead, flags rippled impatiently. I ran for the gangplank leading up to the ship. My foot was inches from the plank when two uniformed women stepped in front of me. My face nearly smashed into the brass buttons of the first woman's coat. "Just where do you think you're going, young lady?" she said. "I'm supposed to be on the Prosperity, ma'am. My name should be on the crew list." "Bit late, aren't you?" said the second officer. She pointed to a man in a dark blue uniform near the bandstand, holding a sheaf of papers under his arm. "You'll have to speak with him. He's got the list." I started in that direction when fingers closed around my shoulders. "There you are, child," Mud wheezed, his sour breath close to my ear. "I thought I lost you." "Let go!" I tried to kick at his shins, but he kept out of range and held me tight. The guards were distracted now, talking to someone in a black suit. They paid no attention as Mud dragged me away from the shadow of the Prosperity, back toward the pressing crowd. We reached the ropes that held back the throng. I twisted around to face him. "Let me go, please! Mud, I'm begging you!" He snorted. "And then what? You think they're going to let you get on that ship?" "They have to! I'm on the crew list!" Mud's bloodshot eyes narrowed, confused. "That's not possible." Over his shoulder, I could see the wharf officials saluting each other, folding up papers and putting them away. Any moment, they'd take down the gangplank. I managed to slip my hand into my pocket. I pulled out the money tin and pressed it to Mud's chest, keeping it covered so no one in the crowd could see. "Here, that's 190 leks." The words burned in the back of my throat, but I forced them out, looking away so I wouldn't have to see my money in Mud's hands. "It's yours if you will just let me go." 190, Mud whispered. He looked me up and down, noticing my nice work clothes for the first time. "Where'd you get that kind of money?" The band started up, and a singer began crooning our national anthem. I felt like I could leap out of my skin. I had to force myself not to shout, not to cause a scene. "I've been saving it for months. I earned it, every coin, and you can have all of it if you'll let me go." Mud's eyes darted from the tin to my face. "You'd give me all this money just to let you get on that ship?" "I'd give you the Queen's jewels if I had them. I'd give anything to get away from you. Can't you see that?" Mud's face slackened. "Yeah," he whispered. "Yeah, I see it, sigh." His grip on my shoulders loosened. I wasted no time. I bolted to the end of the gangplank where the officer with the ship's manifest now stood. My fingers trembling, I smoothed down my braid and steadied my voice. "My name is Sudsai Arawan, sir. I'm assistant to the Prosperity's mapmaker." He rolled his eyes and checked the list in his hand. "All right, but get to it. They're shoving off." The plank rattled beneath my feet as I hurried up and up. I kept my eyes forward. I had never been so high off the ground before. I finally reached the end and stumbled onto the deck of the Prosperity. The crew shoved the gangplank off and sealed the hull. In a blur of commotion, Master Payun rushed over to me. He was a flurry of questions. "Blast it, Cy, where have you been? I worried that you—" He was cut short by the shouting of orders from the top deck. Sailors swirled around us, hurrying to fulfill the commands. The anchor chain clanged against the hull as the crew grunted to crank it up. Sheets of sailcloth billowed loose overhead, then snapped taut in the wind. The deck surged beneath my feet, and I clutched Payun's arm to keep from falling over. He led me to the rail where I could see all the citizens of An Lung waving us farewell. I looked down at the people crowding the docks below, shrinking as we sailed away from them. Everyone in the harbor cheered and shouted, jumping in the air. Everyone except for one man who stood clutching a small metal tin, his eyes on his feet.